Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you. On today's episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, we're going to be talking about keys to successful replanting and underperforming field corrections.
Hi everyone, this is Bill Brush back, talking to you about just kind of a unique little thing that we've all done at some time in our farming career, most of the time unsuccessfully. And I want to talk about some ways to improve on maybe currently what you've been doing and maybe some ideas that maybe you've not taken into consideration. When we're looking at an orchard and we have some attrition, some trees go down, they get old, they might be diseased, could be several things wrong with them. But right now that tree is gone out of your orchard. So we'll just make this simple. If you have 100 trees planted per acre, you just lost 1% of your potential yield. Obviously, you lose 4 or 5 trees per acre, now you've got 5%. You can never really attain those highest end yields with 5% of your trees missing. So we need to get it onto a program where we replace those trees. And first, you want to look at these and why. We'll talk about trees, but then we're going to talk about field crops here in a little bit. So I don't want those that are interested like it's all going to be about trees. It's all going to be about things that we've done before and haven't been successful, and trying to give you strategies so that you can be more successful. So the first thing on a tree crop, we'll look at the reason why either these older trees or trees that aren't there anymore. The tree could have got diseased. It could have got, in nut crops, could have got shaker damage. It could have been on a compacted area that it never got a good root system going. Or it blew partly over and kind of got its roots displaced a little bit, never was the same tree again. It had a certain amount of lack of vigor. It never was as good as the rest of the orchard. There's just multiple reasons why these things could fail. And a lot of these were exacerbated by they had poor root systems, they were leaning the wrong way, and a big wind came up, and all of a sudden now you've got a whole bunch of trees on the ground. And you lose in so many ways. You lose, first of all, lack of production. You don't have those trees in place anymore. And you're going to have to spend money to put them back and replant them into those same areas, okay? And the second thing is, now I got to tear all these trees out. I got to cut them up, push them out. I've got manpower, I've got equipment, and I don't get paid any money for all of that. And neither does any other tree farmer. But it's something that we have to get them out of the field so we can get back to our normal farming practices. We have, at least for that year, no tree in that area. And like I say, it could be anywhere from 1% to up 5-10% of your orchard being. So those things all line up to problems. The other thing that we normally do when we lose trees, we put another tree back in there. We're good about getting them replanted. But we find a very, very high percentage of failures on those that we replant. So first we got to figure out, if we keep doing the same thing over and over, as Einstein said, and expect a different result, that's insanity. So what we need to do is find out how to best get our tree put back into the proper place and give it its best opportunity for success. First thing we do is need to do a little investigative work. We need to dig down with a backhoe and see if we have a compaction layer underneath these trees that have fallen over. It's usually not the same reason always in all the trees, but we do need to look at them in different areas of the orchard to see how they're doing. So we need to break up a compaction layer maybe. We need to get down, and how deep do we need to go? I know a lot of people will clean off the site, pick up the roots, smooth it out, auger in a hole, plant it back in there. If we didn't fix the problem below the depth of where we augered that, we didn't really solve any problems here. We'll have the exact same thing with that tree in 3 to 5 years after we've put the money into it to get it up to that level and to watch it go over again. So first thing we're looking for is break up the compaction layer. The next, we want to remove as many of the old roots as possible, because if it was disease that got to this tree or nematodes, those are great spots to harbor nematodes and where they can hang out, so that your next one is going to be susceptible right away to nematodes or other diseases as soon as they start to get rooted into this. We can apply products like phosphite at the time of planting to help root development and also suppress diseases. Also, if we know what the soil's like in this area and we have good soil samples, we want to get that soil as good as possible, meaning we have it amended, we have the right amount of calcium, magnesium. We're going to help get the roots into better root penetrations, that we can get them to anchor in better. We'll have less compaction if we've worked on that to get them all rooted and make them have the right nutrients available for them to produce those roots. One of the things is I really encourage people to put phosphate in, because phosphate is a root producer and also helps basically make more leaves, bigger leaves, which increases photosynthesis, which restores nutrients to the roots, and everything works off of that.
Now Bill's going to address the problems with trying to properly irrigate your replants in conjunction with the rest of your field.
One of the other things that's really difficult is, now that you have an established orchard, how do I water this replant the same? I can't water it the same as my mature trees, or I'll overwater it. And so if I try to irrigate everything to my replants, I underwater the whole orchard. That never works either. So we have to find a way to minimize how much water we're actually getting to these trees for the first 2 to 4 years and get them up and growing, and then we can assimilate them into the rest of the orchard. We want to incorporate these trees so that they're similar to the rest of the orchard. How do we do that? Well, some people say, well, I flood irrigate my orchard, so whenever I flood irrigate it, they're going to get wet, and that's going to be the end of that. Well, then plant them up higher. Put them on a berm or up higher, maybe a 2 foot above everything. And that'll give a lot of that berm areas to absorb water but not get overly wet, and eventually move down through the soil profile and begin to make that root structure. It's about the only way on flood irrigation I can think of. The next way is on irrigation systems. You need to block some of the sprinklers if that's what you have, or reduce the size of sprinklers, that nozzle size that goes onto that replant tree. Doesn't take long, but it's probably the difference between keeping a successful replant and maybe a failure. Drip, a little more difficult if you have double line drip. One of the things you can do is try to get one of that drip lines out a little farther away and let the other one be closer to the tree, so that your one is really supplying the water, so you're basically only getting half of what the big trees, the larger trees, are getting. It's another way. There's many ways you can do that. But water's key, because we always want to get the proper air and water to maximize nutrient uptake. One of the things I found to be most successful in these replant situations is put in some biostimulants, some humic acid, and same things to stimulate microbial activity. Because a lot of times in the tree planting process, say you backhoe that hole out, you disturb all of that top aerobic zone of 6 to 7 inches, and you put it over to the side. Doesn't mean you put it back on the top 6 or 7 inches again. So you have somewhat a little sluggish, because you don't have enough microbiology there to work and provide the nutrients and the mineralization you're going to need to have a success on these replants, And that's why when I look at it, it's one of the places I've seen really good success with. And get a good one. There's a lot of them out there. There's lots of sales guys selling them, a lot of them on the market. But I think this is a particularly good spot for it. And usually get the ones that are a little bit better. They're normally going to give you better results. They'll cost you a little bit more, but if if they don't do anything for your tree, whatever you paid was too much. So get good ones. They may cost a little bit, but they'll increase your activity. Once you get these out there, you should build up the normal microbiology, and it should not be repeat after repeat after repeat to try to get it to build back up. Also, give your fertilizers a good balance of nutrition, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. Remember I talked about sulfur. On these replants, one of the things you want to do is get them up to as big as you can get as fast as you can, and they have a better opportunity to survive in a mature orchard. And sulfur will give you a diameter advantage, not only on the trunk, but also your limbs. If you can keep it up in that 50 parts per million, 100 pounds per acre of sulfate sulfur, you're going to get 1.5 times the diameter of that wood if you can keep your sulfur up in that. So a lot of people put NPK, or they'll just put nitrogen, a few things. It's best to put a little bit of all of them, of what I call the big four. Potassium will give you limb strength. Phosphorus will give you additional rooting and get the root stimulated. Also, through respiration, will give you bigger leaf size. And also that nitrogen, of course, gives that kick that we need for cell division to get things started to grow. Nitrogen, don't try to get too much. We want to keep it down at, so if you can get something that's higher in P and K, there used to be a product with this called 620-20 that's got 20% phosphorus and potash, but only 6% nitrogen. And if you've got good soil humus and we get that activated with your microbiology, then what you're going to find is you're going to be able to get that tree going and going well. And particularly, don't just put it in and forget about it. It needs to be staked. Don't put a replant in if you're not going to stake it, because we're going to want it to grow fast and allow it to grow its roots, and you'll have it over on its side, and you did all this work, and you still have the same thing, which is a failure of that replant. So stake it, probably at least 2 or 3 times during that first growing year. Go out there and maybe give it a little pruning. This will help get it bigger faster, but it'll also give you a better shape and try to keep it from leaning and make sure it keeps tied up. And it just is something that you'll be way more successful on.
Now Bill's going to talk about open ground.
Now, I've talked about trees primarily, but if you're looking at open ground, and part of your ground there, when you're looking at it, it doesn't perform like everything else. You can see it out there when you're growing it. That portion of the field doesn't grow as well as the rest of it. And of course, it doesn't grow, it doesn't yield, and we see it every year. And if you just keep repeating that, you're never going to fix that. It's always going to be that way. It's always going to be at or below the cost of production, and yet you're farming it just like everything else. So the best way that I know of to do it is to go out there when it's right at harvest or just after harvest, where you can identify the area that's underperforming. And once that area has been identified, we can stake it. Then we can go out there and we can sample that separately. If it's a big enough area that's costing you money, it's probably a big enough area that you can go back and sample. If you have a super high value crop, then it takes a smaller and smaller area for you to say, well, that's enough that I'll go do this. But once you've identified the area, and a lot of the stuff that we have currently, you may not even need to market, because you got yield monitors with GPS. It tells you exactly where the crop falls off and where it starts up again in production, so you can do those kind of things. There's nothing that says you have to go out and do all the field work by foot, but if you don't have these other tools, then that's another way you can do it. So get your sample and compare it to the other and see what's missing. That's a good place to start, because if the other's performing at the level that you're very satisfied with, then why don't I get this area to be at the same level? See all the pieces. Not near as expensive to do small parts with the whole program, getting everything up to as close to the excellent level as you can. A lot of times it's nothing more than applying more lime and getting calcium and magnesium up to where they need to be to get your soil structure right, so that now it takes water better, and then of course now the plant and the crop does better. So those are what I would go after, so that you do that. And then monitor. You see how much I improved it. Knowing that things like lime may take 2 to 3 years to get full effect. And so see if you're improving after that first year. It could be a single nutrient. It could be just I have absolutely no zinc in that area. For whatever reason, there's none in that section. Go out and correct it, and remarkably, sometimes if everything else is there, you get a massive response. This is the old lowest stave in the barrel, and if it's really low, then you just can't hold enough water in that barrel, and you can't get the good out of your nutrients because you are not able to maximize the value of the rest of the nutrients because of this one really super deficient, super low nutrient level, creating a huge deficiency. The other thing is, just for practicality, you need to value your time and effort. Ground prep is really the same whether you're going to be successful or whether you just create a failure. It's just like farming that area that's not productive. We have the same amount of effort, same amount of money invested into the crop, but we don't get the yield back. In a tree crop, we have the same amount of time putting in a tree or replant, or when the day that we plant it, we have just the same amount. So you have to do it right. You have to do it right. Or you're going to be doing exactly the same thing the next year or 2 years later. If you soil sample like I've recommended, you can then predict what I'm going to need for the replant. If I'm super low of phosphate or whatever, I may be gradually building it up, but I need to build it up faster on these replants. So I need to go after it a little bit harder with a little higher rate. Potash could be essentially the same thing. If you look at the overall cost of things, meaning, if you did that across all your acreage, it would be a really more expensive maybe than you can afford with your budget. But for a few replants, it really doesn't add up to a lot of dollars. And if you keep doing it and not getting anything out of it, you're going to save dollars because you're not going to be wasting them anymore. Also, early on, watch those replants for symptoms of deficiencies to head off stress. That's what you're trying to do, reduce stress, because they have a hard time because they're younger and aren't being treated like everything else. The majority of the field gets treated one way. It's going to get treated the same way, whether it needs it or not. You want to watch for those symptoms so you can head it off, because if you can stop stress before it happens, and a good example is potash. If you have enough potash there to reduce the stress of a lot of the growth that those trees need to make in the first 3 to 4 years, you'll be a long way towards getting that replant to be a very productive part of your orchard in a short amount of time. Just try to limit overwatering the best you can. It's one of those things that when I see people irrigating, irrigation is something that's the most important management thing you do, is irrigating properly. But it's so hard not to, and it's so hard for a gopher or a squirrel to upset what happened to that tree by biting a hole in the line, and we'd missed it and it didn't get so. But always try to limit the overwatering the best you can, and then take a little bit of time to evaluate your failures. Why aren't I doing a good job of replants? Why are they all dying? Why do I put 100 trees in and I only get 5 that come out that survive? You need to take time and why did they fail? And look back to some of these things I talked about as, did I do these things? And if I didn't, maybe those are the things that are making me unsuccessful. Learn from each failure. And then once you've done that, use only the best quality fertilizers. It's similar to feeding a young baby. You don't just grab, pizza off the table and try to feed it pizza. What are they? They're on really strict formula so that they're building up health, digestion, a lot of things. Well, that tree in essence is doing a lot of the same thing. It's feeling its way into new territory every day, trying to get there. So use the best. It's not a lot extra when you look at just how few you're doing. Because we need all the help we can get, because you are, not going to be as easy to grow a replant in an orchard, not as easy to redo a piece of your field. It takes time and effort, but we need to do that to maximize yield. We need to prepare replant areas, both out in the field and in orchards, so that allow drying to settle the ground so that we don't have it higher or lower or it caves in, like on a replant where we backhoe it and then we jam a tree in the ground, and as soon as it gets wet, it sinks and goes down. Then also allow for the difference within your replants. If your replants are smaller, they're going to have less energy to make up for it. You may have to, in some years we have really nice big ones, and other years we have smaller ones. You have to allow for that when you do that. I've seen everything done right and a really poor tree, and I won't say poor, it's got all the genetic material to do well, but it takes a lot of effort to get it up and going, and you have to make sure you've done everything possible to make it successful. So hopefully today I've given you a few ideas of why myself, along with many others, have had really poor success on replants. And another thing, I always look at a guy next to me that's had maybe a similar problem and watch what he's doing and see if he's doing something even outside of the keys or the little things that I've talked about today to make your replants and those poor areas of your field more successful. Because at the end of the day, we need every acre of our farm to be as productive as is possible to give us the best opportunity to make profit, so that we're able to do everything we did this year and maybe a little more to get our production up higher and higher. The world needs the food, we know that, and we're here to provide it for them. We just need to make sure we stay as profitable as possible by producing the biggest crops at the most economic way possible. Until next time, this is Bill Brush. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for another very good episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure many of our listeners very much so enjoyed what you had to say. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.